Let me introduce our speaker for today, Kyle Cassidy. Most people think of Kyle as a documentary photographer. He's photographed orphans living in the sewers under Bucharest, spent days with the Dalai Lama, and covered numerous political campaigns. So, the Rick Santorum's Wikipedia photo is his. But much of his work is also extremely conceptual. He's done several strange collaborations with science fiction authors like Elizabeth Bear and Emma Bull and Michael Swanwick. He's done album covers. Kyle is working on a book of portraits of actress Fairuza Balk. He did a book with Neil Gaiman, creator of Sandman comic books, and with musician Amanda Palmer from the Dresden Dolls, called Who Killed Amanda Palmer? And if you noticed Twitter exploding yesterday, you'll know that they're up to a new top secret project that they've just started. So who is Kyle Cassidy? It depends on who you ask, because his work covers a lot of different circles, but he might be best known for the best-selling 2007 photography book, Armed America, which was the result of 3 years driving across the country, photographing gun owners in their living rooms and bedrooms and kitchens. Much of his work revolves around context, either showing people in context or removing them from it, as he did when he set up a portrait studio in Zuccotti Park and did a very popular series of photographs of protesters for the Huffington Post. In his most recent book, which is the reason why I really wanted him to come here, War Paint, he photographed the tattoos of American servicemen and women, including people just returned from the fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, to veterans of World War II and Korea. Unfortunately, we were hoping that he would have the book here and he could be doing book signing. The book is going to be released on 28th of May, so mark your calendars and put it on your Amazon orders. So without further ado, I introduced Kyle Cassidy, a very well-known photographer. Thank you, Kyle, for coming and sharing your expertise in photography, ethnography with our students.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here and to talk about this. I don't really have a formal presentation. I just threw a bunch of slides into a folder, and I figured I would go through and just talk about things as they come up. And I have some pictures from War Paint too that I'd like to show you and maybe read you some of what people had to say about their tattoos. But all of this falls under the greater rubric of storytelling. And storytelling is one of the things that makes us human. And I think it's because if we believe that the past won't disappear, it somehow makes the present more poignant, and that we're willing to do things in the present because we know that they may live on in the past. And the way that we tell stories, whether it's in a bar or in a living room, recounting some event that happened before, or writing things down, or recording things on audio or video, or taking pictures, or even tattooing yourself, is a way of telling stories. And the first time I think that I consciously wanted to tell a story visually was when this group of goths moved down the street from me, and there were about 20 of them living in a house, and they had huge, enormous parties once a month. And I thought, well, I should go and introduce myself and document these events. And so for a couple months I went around and I photographed just people at the parties, and it ultimately left me feeling like I wasn't telling the story the way that I wanted to, because in context it didn't seem as interesting as taking people out of context. So I went back and set up a little portrait studio in the kitchen for a couple months, and as people sort of went through the kitchen to find beer, I would photograph them in this little portrait studio. And this was in 1999, and I went back yesterday and just started looking at these, and I like them a lot more now than I had over the years, but I think they're relatively successful in telling the story of these people by removing them from all of the other people that they're with. So we're telling the story here of clothes, and many people have tattoos here, and dress, and the way that people are making themselves individual. And when I was in college, I always went to the lectures that famous novelists would come, and I would sit in the front row and I would listen. And invariably, they always said, well, I was living in a trailer and eating dirt and licking dew off of grass to survive. And then when my third novel came out, I got famous and I moved to a 10-bedroom apartment in Manhattan. And they had skipped over all of the stuff that I was there to hear, which was how to get from point A to point B. I already knew that they were at point C because I'd seen the New York Times book review. And over the years, I've come to realize that success comes from a bit of talent, a bit of luck, and a bit of hard work. And there's no, I don't think, magical formula amounts of those that you put together and get something, get success out of it. If you walk into an elevator and Lady Gaga is in the elevator, that's luck. And if you can say to Lady Gaga, I think I should play the harp on your next album. In fact, I have a copy of my CD. That's talent and hard work compiled with luck. And the results come from those three things. And I realized as I started to get better that it all really went back to the hard work that I had done starting with that party where I set up my light and I went in and I met people and I introduced myself to people and I started taking pictures of them. And over the years, my lighting got better and the people that I was talking to got more talented and more interesting. And my photos started to, this is actually the Wikipedia photo for steampunk. And then I started doing a lot of album covers, which I think was a logical progression from the stuff that I had been doing before. And it kept with the same idea of find something interesting and put your light in front of it. And the Who Killed Amanda Palmer album cover was kind of a big career breakthrough for me. And it looks a lot more sophisticated than it is. It really took 10 minutes to do the whole thing. And a lot of other photographers would have built the scaffolding and put levels up there and had assistants, and I just held my camera out like that, and then we went out and got pizza. And we thought we had a very clever idea with Who Killed Amanda Palmer, and we were going to do a 16-page booklet in the CD, and each photo would have a clue in it, and by the end, you'd be able to figure out who killed Amanda Palmer, and we were thinking, well, we're really great. And we went to the record company, and they said, no, you get 4 panels like everyone else next, and my heart was broken. And Amanda had been talking to Neil Gaiman about something else at the time, and he said, she told him about this, and he said, oh, that's not it's a wall, it's a hurdle. Well, let's do a book, and I'll write stories about it. And so we did a book where I took photos, and Neil wrote stories, and they were based on this notion that Amanda Palmer had somehow been killed and somebody did it. And so all of my stories, or my input on it was photos that told half of a story because I wanted other people to be able to sort of fill in what happened, whether or not it was the person who was writing the story about it or just somebody sitting at home looking at it. You're supposed to laugh at this one. Thank you. And so my photos tended to be relatively elaborate, like renting a funeral home and an antique casket and a 19th century hearse. And then after a while, I started thinking that I really should be taking the talent that I had and the things that I had learned and going out and telling stories of other people. And which is one of the things that led me to go to Occupy Wall Street when it first started, because I had seen, like everyone else, I'd seen thousands and thousands of pictures, and they were all of thousands and thousands of people, and little people next to little people didn't really tell me anything that I could pick apart and understand. And I think everybody at the time was asking, why are you here? And so I went and I asked everybody why they were there, and the Huffington Post did a big piece on it, and had this photo booth set up it was a 3-by-5 foot square surrounded by people sleeping on the ground and cardboard boxes, and it was all I could do to keep people from standing in the one spot where I had cleared out. I had 2 assistants who were sort of wrangling people and getting model releases signed and doing the audio recordings of people. And I think that by removing people from context here, I was better able to tell their story. And you can find this on the Huffington Post if you want to see others of them. Good, you were supposed to laugh there too. And Costis talked a little bit about Armed America, and I'm going to show like 3 slides from that, which was a book that photos of people who own guns. And I found myself telling or hearing the stories of lots and lots of different people from all around the country, and it really changed my life seeing this, because I come from Philadelphia, where there's not really the gun culture that there is in a lot of America. How many people are from central Pennsylvania? Okay, there's a few people here. And I found that in central Pennsylvania, when I was out in places like Centralia or whatever, this is a family from central Pennsylvania, it was the thing. It wasn't a subculture, it was the culture. And I realized that in telling other people's stories, I was also telling my own, or I was discovering my own story. I was discovering who I was, and I was discovering from what platform I was standing when I was telling other people's stories, or when I was viewing the world. And that was a big epiphany for me in realizing the place that I was standing, the place that I was coming from. And being a storyteller, you always have some sort of bias. And if you can recognize your bias, I think you're a little bit closer to getting rid of it. So, on to war paint. When I was doing Armed America, I met this gentleman who was in his 80s, and he had a tattoo of a paratrooper on his right arm, and I asked him about it. And it turned out that he'd been a paratrooper in World War II, and he'd parachuted into France on D-Day, and he lost a leg in the Battle of the Bulge, and no one had ever asked him about his tattoo. He talked for 2 hours. And I realized that these stories weren't being written down, and that they were going away, and that they were very significant stories. And after that, I never looked at an old man on the bus the same way after talking to this guy. And I realized then that his generation had gone through something that I couldn't comprehend, but that they had left these markers that they could identify one another with. And then I started wanting to talk to other veterans about their tattoos. And any book that you do is some combination of what you want to do and what somebody will pay you to do. And I was very lucky to find Schiffer Books, who was very interested in seeing this come to fruition. These are some, and so when I did the portraits, I did a portrait of somebody in context of their surroundings. Then I also did close-ups, because some people are interested in seeing the tattoos, and I'm very interested in seeing tattoos, especially on people who've had the tattoo for 50 years. And I see friends of mine who've gotten tattoos, and I wonder, what is that going to look like in 50 years? And well, now I have a little bit of reference. This is Aaron, who was an artillery captain in Iraq, and he has Saint Bernadette tattooed on his leg. And Saint Bernadette is, I hear you all shouting it, yes, the patron saint of artillerymen. Now I know this, and now you know this. There's a lot of secret code in military tattoos. And I photographed a bunch of Navy SEALs. And these guys don't want their faces photographed for what reasons that were a little obscure to me at first, but then became more obvious as I thought about it. And they also don't want anything on them that identifies them as United States military, because they're out doing secret covert things, swimming up sewer pipes and whatever Chuck Norris does. So they have a lot of coded symbols in their tattoos that other people can recognize if they are in the club. And this is a bone frog. I don't know if you can see it up here. And the bone frog is sort of code word for frog man. I'm a frog man. So he has this in here. Me walking down the street and seeing it, I would think, oh, he's got a frog skeleton on his arm. But another Navy diver might look at that and say, give him the secret handshake, and they would go out and buy beer. And here's another Navy SEAL, and some of the coded messages on his arm are, there's a man in BDUs with, he has an automatic rifle, and he also has a trident, which is Neptune. And there's a skeletal sailor, mermaids, King Neptune. These are all the symbolism that they're using to express who they are to people who should or shouldn't know. This is a Bible verse that many Navy SEALs have, and it's hearing the voice of the Lord saying, "Who shall I send?" And I said, "Send me." And that's a very heroic statement, I think. You know, when no one can go, I'll go. And I found myself very moved, actually, by hanging out with these people who were kind of fearless. This is a Navy sniper, or not Navy, an Army sniper from Afghanistan who also has a lot of very coded symbolism in his tattoos. One of the things is this arrow with an S on it, sniper S, and an arrow for accuracy. Another Bible verse, and a Crusader cross. Now, this gentleman had his tattoo in World War II, and it was to identify who he was. He said, "This isn't anything other than to say who I am. I'm a swabby." And at one point in time, this was a sailor with a mop, mopping a deck. That's what he did. And tattoos have gotten much more intricate as the artistic skills of tattoo artists have gotten better, as the equipment has gotten better, as ink has gotten better. And we can see on this fellow here much more detailed work of this digital jungle camo and a Marine Corps emblem. Here's another World War II tattoo. And this gentleman has a Vietnam tattoo, which looks a little older than that. He said it had a lot of color in it when he got it. And it's a dagger through the skin, which is a very nautical tattoo, very common with sailors. And this is Bobby Martin, and I'd like to read a little bit of Bobby talking about his tattoo. He says, "I got my tattoo on Father's Day in 1987. We'd stopped at a red light, and my wife wanted to buy me something. I looked out the window, and we were right next to a tattoo parlor, and I said, 'You know what? I'd like that Marine tattoo.' I remember the day I got wounded, October 21st, 1967, from a mortar round. I knew I was hit bad because I was bleeding in the front. It tore a hole in the front of my stomach. There were holes all in my arms, and I could feel blood rolling around in my back. I had a hole in the middle of my back that missed the spine, fortunately, but it hit the artery. My best friend said to me, 'Bobby, I can't stop the bleeding.' I was weak, I was tired, I knew I was bleeding to death. At that point, I knew it was over. I knew I wasn't going to make it. At that moment, I was at peace with myself. I wasn't upset. I sat there and waited for the end. The thing that saved me was that there was a medevac that was flying right overhead. He heard the radio call and said, 'I'm right there,' and picked me up. When we landed at the airstrip in Da Nang, they didn't even take me off the chopper. 2 corpsmen jumped in, grabbed my arms, and started giving me blood and plasma. Talking to the guys afterwards, they told me that we were wounded at 9:20 Saturday morning, and they started the operation at 10:45. So within an hour and 20 minutes, I was 40 miles away in an operating room. The surgeons told me afterwards that I might have bled to death. The wounds might have killed me, but somewhere there I had the will to live. It's like my second birthday. I started life again right then. I celebrate it every year with my wife and my kids. It's a day I'll never forget." And I realized that after talking to Bobby that sometimes tattoos are signs for other people, and sometimes they're notes for yourself. And this is a note for Bobby, and this is maybe a note for Bobby's family, and people know him. It's significant of a particular event. And here's another, unfortunately, relatively common tattoo, which is a memorial tattoo to somebody who's died. And is anybody here in the military, served in the military? Well, at a military funeral, when people are deployed, they make a monument out of the person's rifle, their helmet, and their boots. And this signifies that somebody has died. And they put these in a place where people can see them. And friends will come by and mourn in those places. In some bases, you might have 10 of these at once from people who had been killed. And this was to signify a particular friend of this person's who had died. And also he had dog tags tattooed on, which is also common, and these are for each of his deployments. And finally, this tattoo, which I found very moving, is it's a hand coming up through demons. And while, like many military servicemen and women, while he was deployed, he developed a substance abuse problem, alcoholism, and while trying to get through the things that he had seen. And this is his symbol of himself trying to claw his way out of the mental problems that he has now that you can't see. They're not visible wounds. He didn't lose a leg, but he's got something going on that is a terrible personal struggle for him. And this is a tattoo for himself. This is Charlie, who was what they call a tunnel rat in Vietnam. And the Vietnamese would dig small tunnels and build cities underneath them almost, and they would hide underground. And when the United States forces would come across these tunnels, they would send down somebody small. And Charlie did not want this job. He didn't want to do it, but he was the smallest person there, and they made him do it. And he went into 12 tunnels, and it was very painful for him to even say that to me. He just doesn't want to talk about the events that happened there. And getting this tattoo with a tunnel rat on it was a way of his dealing with that, coming to terms with events that had happened that are so terrible he can't tell people about them. And this gentleman has his I Ching fortune on his arm for every stage of his military deployment. And this is a tattoo that memorializes an IED going off and not killing him. It was a very significant event in his life that this bomb went off next to his Humvee, and the shrapnel that went into the vehicle didn't hit him. No one was killed, and he thinks of that too as a second birthday, like Bobby Martin thought of the day that he was wounded as a second birthday. He thinks of this as the day that he wasn't killed, when so many other people had been killed. And I'd like to read you this one too. This is Danny Martin. He says, "I got my first tattoo when I was 15. It's a bird, and it says Mom and Dad on top of it. I figured if they found out, they wouldn't be so mad at me. I got the skull a year later. I had the other one hidden all the time. One morning, my father wakes me up for school. He wakes me up and he sees the tattoo and says, 'What the hell's that?' And we go downstairs and he says, 'Hey, everybody, check out Big Shot. He's got a tattoo.' So I'm thinking he saw my brand new one. And he says, 'Go ahead, show everybody.' So I rolled up my sleeve, showed everybody the skull, and my dad says, 'Check him out. He's got a bird on his arm.' I was like, oops. My old man cracked me upside the head, and he tattooed my skull. And then later, he had Vietnam put over the skull, and he got a U.S. Marine Corps tattoo with a friend who said he wanted to become a tattoo artist. And he said, 'Well, buy a machine and you can practice on me,' which, oddly enough, I've heard from a number of people. And a POW MIA tattoo, which is very common among Vietnam veterans. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. I think I have 10 minutes to go, so I'll move a little more quickly. This guy said, "I don't know when I got my tattoo, but I can tell you it was payday." He has a machine gunner tattooed on his arm. He got it at Camp Lejeune. A World War II veteran who was very proud of his tattoo. And he has been since the day he got it. He said when he sits at a bar, he always sits with it out so people can see his anchor. And John Plantovsky went to Korea because he volunteered for Korea because he heard news reports that they were killing children. And he'd gotten a tattoo with his mother's name on it. And he went to Korea, and 9 days later he got shot in the tattoo, which is right there. And he's had experiences there which still keep him awake at night. He was also one of the Army personnel stationed in Nuremberg, Germany during the trials. And he has a tattoo memorializing that. And this is George Klodowski, who is a World War II veteran. I just want to read you his story. There are things I remember very well about the Navy. I remember the day we got this message. I was the chief radioman, and I was the one who received the messages. So I called the captain over, and you never talk to the captain. I said, "You'd better have a look at this, sir." And the message said, "Air raid, Pearl Harbor. This is not drill." He grabbed it, and he ran out of the room and said, "This is war." I remember that, and I remember my tattoo. There was this guy on the ship who had the same tattoo. I always liked it. It was 3 horses. I said, if I'm ever crazy enough to get a tattoo, that's the one I'd get. And then about a year later, I'd been out on liberty, and I woke up with this bloody paper towel taped to my arm. And I thought, I don't remember getting in a fight or getting stabbed. And one of the other guys started peeling back the paper towel, and he said, "Hey, there's a tattoo under here." So I had a tattoo, but I always liked it. And George died of cancer 4 days after I photographed him, which is always a very melancholy experience, photographing as many people or getting to meet as many people as I do doing something like this or Armed America, because these people become part of your lives. And then occasionally you'll get an email that says so-and-so died, or more frequently, oh, the dog, the cat, whoever you happen to photograph died. Then your circle of friends grows, and it fills sometimes with sadness. And this tattoo is to memorialize his dolphin pins. When you're a submariner and you've qualified, which means you can make every part of the ship work. If something starts flooding anywhere in the ship, you can fix it. If something breaks anywhere, you can fix it. And so you practice and practice and practice for this, and then you are awarded these dolphin pins, which means you're cool, they call it you're qualified. And when you get your pins, they have 2 pins on the back with little things on them, that clip under your jacket. And your buddies take your shirt off, and they hold these pins up against you, and then they punch them into your skin, and then they all punch you. And he seemed really happy about it. He's like, "Oh yeah, it was great." And then they take you out and get you drunk. And he said that the good thing about it was, because you were friends of theirs, they made you throw up so that you didn't die from alcohol poisoning. And he had a terrific time. And this was a happy tattoo for him. This is Jeremy. He's actually on the cover of the book. Was a Marine in Iraq, and he actually gave me the flag that he'd flown over his tent while he was there. And this guy, John, had a story that really moved me. A few months ago, a debate broke out on my blog as to whether or not you should thank a soldier if you're not in favor of the war they're fighting. And I didn't really have an answer for that question until I met John, who had been drafted in 1968. He didn't want to go to war. He was against the war. He got drafted, and he spent 8 months in Vietnam and experienced very, very horrible things there. And he has a long story where he talks about that in the book. But he closes by saying, "Coming home was weird because we really don't know how to react. Nobody spit on me. I didn't have a hard time with people. It's just that nobody wanted to hear what we did about shooting or war or all that. So you try to forget. Your brain is pretty good at putting stuff in the back, just shoving it away where you hope it will never see the light of day again. Then one day, all of a sudden, it comes back. It's hard knowing that I made it back and a lot of people didn't. I did stuff over there I never thought I would have been able to do, with mortars coming down or rifles being shot at you. You're running around in the open and stuff like that. But I did that. It was the job, and I had to do it, and I did it. I wear Vietnam shirts all the time. This summer, I went out and bought pullover shirts with nothing on them, maybe a pocket, because I didn't want those 8 months to be my life. But I've realized those 8 months are my life." And I realized after hearing that's why you thank a soldier, because they have what can be a job that can change them forever in a way that they didn't ask for. And they're doing it ostensibly because we asked them to do it, whether or not we actually, we as a people, did ask them to do this. And hearing the stories of people whose lives had been really devastated in both physical ways by being injured, or in mental ways, was another epiphany that I've had. And I've been lucky to have a career where my mind has been changed so many times about things that I thought I knew. And I think I'll probably end here. We're close to the Q&A time, correct? And I just want to thank you all so very much for having me out here. And I'll stick around afterwards as well. Thanks.
We'll now have questions from students.
Hi, my name is Andrew Merriweather. I'm a sophomore. I was wondering if you yourself had a tattoo, and if so, or if not, why? And what are your views on tattoos?
That's a very good question. When I was, I guess it was maybe 20 when my friends started getting tattoos, and my friend Chris showed up one night and he's like, "Guess what I got? I got a tattoo," and he had a Tweety bird on his arm, and he thought it's really cool, and I thought, I don't know if you're going to like Tweety Bird in 20 years. And, you know, I'd actually like to, I haven't seen him in a while, but I would like to ask him if he still likes Tweety Bird that much. But it's never occurred, I've never been at a point where there's something that I think I will still like in 20 years. And when I met that first veteran, Bill, and he had the paratrooper tattooed on his arm, I thought, you know, if I had parachuted into France and lost a leg in the Battle of the Bulge, I might put that on my arm. So I don't think that I've had an experience yet that I think I would be comfortable remembering forever. So no, I don't have a tattoo.
So I have two questions. I think you just answered it. So that first paratrooper, that was Wild Bill Garnier.
That was Wild Bill Garnier.
Yes. And my second question is, have you thought about photographing military spouses? I'm an ex-Army wife, and we also have quite a collection of tattoos, especially from the last 10 years.
I have indeed thought about photographing Army wives, and in fact, there was one in here who I was going to read her story. This is Rita Ray, who's an Army wife and an Army mother, and her son was injured by an IED in Iraq, and she got a phone call at 4:30 in the afternoon while she was driving home from work, and it was her son on the phone, and he sounded very bad, and he said, "Mom, I've been injured. I'm alive, but I've been injured," and then the phone went dead. And she knew that the Army would let them call if they could still breathe. And she waited 3.5 weeks to hear from the Army that he wasn't dead. And during that 3.5 weeks, he was severely injured, but during that 3.5 weeks, she had gotten a tattoo to memorialize him, although he turned out to have survived. A lot of the vets that I photographed really made me wish that I wasn't stuck on tattoos. It made me wish that I could photograph many other aspects of it, and I would be very interested in keeping photographing military families, military wives. And in fact, there is a service that provides photos for vets who are deployed, so family portraits and things like that families can then send out to their soldiers or sailors or Marines, and I should really do that. Does that answer your question?
Hi, my question is, as a documentary photographer, how do you capture the essence of your subjects while still inevitably putting a little bit of yourself in each photo? Yeah,
that's a really good question. And some of the time, I mean, it's always going to look like you to some extent, and that's probably a good thing, that you have some sort of recognizable style, I think. But trying to be as fair as possible, I think, is the most important thing. And that if you're photographing somebody that you don't like, that photo has to be as good as a photo of somebody who you do like. That's my own personal philosophy. And I try and treat each portrait individually, each person away from who they are or my feelings about them, and treat it as an image that I want to be proud of. Many times I put people in their particular context. Like when I photograph the gun owners, I photograph them in their houses, I photograph them with their cats and dogs, and in fact there were a couple of reviews that said it should be a book of dog photos. They're called a book of dog photos or something like that. There's like 27 dogs in the book. But I thought if somebody came to my house and said, "I want to take a picture of you and your family," I would get my cat in it, right? Because that's kind of who I am. So I wanted to make sure that I was getting the elements that I thought really captured those people. And it might be like you collect glass bottles, or you have a baby, something like that. You have all this baby furniture in your house or whatever that tells a story about you. And I try and get as many of those elements that are important to telling that story into a frame. Your frame is like your canvas. And to exclude the things that I don't think tell the story. So, you get the broom out of there and you get the fridge out of there, but you make sure that you have the big centerpiece that somebody spent hours putting the flowers together on, because that's kind of who they are. So figuring out who somebody is, stuffing that stuff into the frame, making it the best picture that you can, and trying to clear your head of anything other than making the best picture. Anything else?
Some of the female military officers or military people, could you tell us a story of one of the females that you...
Yes, I can actually. I'll get to you right in one second here. This is Natalie, who had a really good story. If I can't find it, Natasha, excuse me. So Natasha said very eloquently that she has 2 tattoos on her arms that represent heaven and hell, because that's what she realized Afghanistan was. I was in the most dangerous part of that place for a year, and I learned to take the good with the bad, to roll with the punches. You can't affect everything in life. Sometimes you just have to take it. In Afghanistan, I realized nothing is completely good and nothing is completely bad. Some things just are. And that was a big epiphany for me too. She's involved in this huge military effort in Afghanistan that's doing some bad things, and they're doing some good things. They're training people, they're building buildings, and at the same time, people are dying and things like that. And she realized that she's part of a machine that does good and it does bad, and that's it. And you learn to deal with it. And so getting these tattoos is a way of her memorializing this realization that she'd had. And that's not actually an uncommon one. There were a couple people who had angels and devils and things like that, because they were doing things that were good and things that they felt were bad. I'm sorry.
I'm Linda Fritz. Did you talk to any military personnel who regretted getting their tattoos?
Yes, yeah. There were a couple people who didn't like their tattoos. There was one guy who I unfortunately did not get to photograph, who had his tattoo halfway removed. And the way that they used to remove tattoos before lasers was he went to his dermatologist, and the guy took a handful of salt and sand and rubbed it on his arm until it bled and said, "Come back in 4 weeks." And he said, "No, I'm never coming back." And so he had half of a tattoo on his arm. There was one World War II vet named Tom O'Day who has an anchor on his arm, and he said, yeah, he's not necessarily unhappy with it, but he really wished that he got it someplace where it wasn't showing all the time. There was another person who got a tattoo. She joined the Marine Corps, and before she went to boot camp, she got an eagle, globe, and anchor tattooed on her, which her drill instructor made merciless fun of her for the entire time she was in boot camp, because it was a tattoo that she had not earned yet by getting through boot camp. So she really wished that she'd gotten that one later. But on the whole, people have been relatively happy with even some of the crudest tattoos. And it could be because that there is that significant meaning that I talked about, that I don't have this meaning in my life. But they've been through an experience that pumps more meaning into that tattoo.
Wendy Baker Davis. Someone like Natasha, when it's a very personal sort of tattoo, what do they think about people coming up and asking them about it? Are they somewhat protective of it, or are they happy to show it off? What did you find?
There was another story that I wanted to share with you, but we didn't really have time. But let me just read the last paragraph of this. Is a guy named Nicholas Cherry who's been shot twice and blown up once. And I think I think that nobody should have to tell a story. Nobody who's like 25 years old should ever be able to start a story saying, well, the second time I got shot. It shouldn't happen. But Nicholas's story started out like that. And he got shot twice and then blown up by an IED and spent 11 months in the hospital. And he has a tattoo of Superman. And he said, the reason I got a Superman tattoo, even though I'm not bulletproof, I've survived getting shot twice and blown up once. I've survived a lot. All these tattoos carry a memory. Every memory is an event that could have gone two ways, either better or worse, but it didn't. I walk with these because I don't have a photo album. I can keep my memories in my head, but I'd rather it be shown. I'd rather people ask and be able to explain to them what they mean. So at least for some people, they want people to ask. It's an invitation to start a conversation.
Hi, my name's Amalia Handler. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you came to interview these people and how you networked through these communities.
That's a good question too, because doing the types of things that I do, sometimes people form themselves into groups, and sometimes people don't form themselves into groups. And sometimes the groups that people form themselves into aren't terribly good at getting back to anybody. I found that VFW is a terrible way to find veterans, because they never call back. And there are places that vets gather, but they tend to be in those places kind of homogenous. Like if you go to a biker barbecue, you kind of have the same kind of people there. And I didn't want to go to a motorcycle convention, photograph 500 tattoos and have them all look the same. I wanted people who had tattoos that were incidental to their life, that they didn't, I'm not a tattoo guy, I just happen to have a tattoo. I wanted people like that. So it started out and worked best by word of mouth. So I would go into a room like this and I would say, does anybody here know someone with a military tattoo? Raise your hand. Okay, there we go, see? There's 3 people right here. And then I'd run over and say, hey, can you hook me up with somebody's info? And then they might know somebody else. So it worked kind of slowly like that. But I did have some really good help from individual vets, or sometimes people who are involved with veterans organizations who were really enthusiastic about it. Usually they had a tattoo themselves, and they said, I know 5 people with tattoos. And I would say, I have a blog that a lot of people read, so I would post on my blog, I am coming to Chicago, and somebody would email and say, I live in Tinley Park, and I run the American Legion down there, and you should come down because we have 10 tattooed vets, and I'm going to get all their phone numbers and get them all organized. And so getting captains on the ground, I discovered when I was doing Armed America that getting somebody to do the organization work somewhere where you're not is the best way to do things, so that when you swing into town, you don't have to do anything other than take pictures. And so it's sort of like that. I would find somebody who lived in a town that had people in it, have them rounded up before I got there, and then go in. And once you have a book out, I discovered that it means that your phone calls always get returned. So if I call up and say, hi, I'm Kyle Cassidy, I did this book, I'm doing another book, like I'm working on a book about roller derby right now, and which is a lot of tattoos again. And nobody doesn't return my phone calls because I've done a book before, and everybody, and they suddenly take you more seriously. So, it's like I was living in a trailer eating pizza crusts and licking dew off, and now after my 3rd book came out, it's real easy for people to return your phone calls. So
let's thank Kyle for a wonderful talk.